Thanks, Pete. So tonight, hello everyone. Long time no see, even though I was sort of there in Melbourne about a month ago now. It was a long time before that as well. Tonight, I'd like to share with you my experience diving down multiple rabbit holes to solve an issue with fonts being mysteriously clipped in our product here at PayPay. It was a immensely frustrating issue to resolve, and it just so happened that I had some time to tackle it, and so I did. So a little bit of background first on the issue. So what, where, and why. We would receive sporadic reports that text was being clipped from our QA team, and it was selective reporting. Like if the string had the company name or other mandated text within it, they would be reported to the engineering team. Others would fly under the radar. And as 99.9% of the text in our app is Japanese, the only occurrences that QA and others would notice actually featured the company name. So it was, and more features meant more occurrences. It grew tiring fixing each issue as it kept cropping up, and something began just to not feel right amongst the team, but nobody really knew how to resolve it. We would just fix everything in a piecemeal fashion. The first fix, and I was directly involved in this, was a subclass, because why not? We decided to make a UILabel subclass to fix the issue, and I know there's probably a few people being like, "Oh, subclasses, just use Swift UI or something," but it's what we needed. And inside the subclass, we decided to override intrinsic content size. And our rationale for that was, well, the text was clipping, right? So the size was too small. The text wasn't fitting. It was going over the edge. So we needed to make sure that the label didn't clip. Let's give it a larger drawing rect. We did attempt to override text rect for bounds. I do remember that being on the table at one point, but I'm not sure as to why we didn't go with that. This was a few months ago now. And I realized a little too late that this was just a band-aid over the real issue. Because while the subclass solution worked for most cases, it only worked where we actually used the subclass. And it didn't work for UIButton, where the issue was also presenting itself. The first rabbit hole I decided to dive down was making another subclass, because we kept receiving reports of text being cut off, and it was a game of cat and mouse to replace standard UILabel usage with the subclass. And obviously, if we forgot to use the subclass in the zib, the storyboard, or the class itself, then the text stood a really good chance of being clipped off. And more time would be wasted fixing it, with QA issuing more tickets and the general conversation hubbub that happens in Slack, and it's hard to track everything. And I'm not sure why it was me. It could have been any one of us in the team, but I'm going to be the one, even though I don't like being the one. I decided to ask the managers if they had any more data to give me so I could attempt to fix all of them where possible. I guess I kind of shot myself in the foot there. But it turned out that 95% of the occurrences were with English characters. And the big thing there is we actually have an English mode. So foreigners in Japan that cannot read Japanese effectively enough to use a financial app can change the app into English. And every descending character was being cut off. 5% of the occurrences also clipped the character modifiers on Japanese characters. And that's the little marks that you can see there on the slide. They're called a dakuten and a handakuten, quick background, and it changes the sound of the character from example, a ba to a pa. And omitting this little modifier can completely change the meaning of the word, unlike English, where you can kind of just infer the meaning if some segment of the text is cut off. So it was an issue that absolutely needed to be resolved. So I decided to just ask around the local tech community. Turned out it was a familiar problem. And other apps in Japan were facing this issue, and they had tried to fix it using similar methods to our own. Everyone had come up with a label subclass, or just a container view with no clips to bounds turned off, for example. And the base assumption tended to be that Figma, Sketch, whichever design tool here, didn't properly support Japanese fonts. So adjustments had to be made by engineering to counteract the resulting text clipping. I wasn't satisfied with that conclusion, that world-famous design tools such as Figma or Sketch didn't support Japanese text. I wanted to find out what was really going on, and I had some time because we shipped something early, right? And I had 3 or so days, 4 days to really sink my teeth into this. UIButtons and UI text view were also affected across the board as well, in both languages. It just didn't add up to me. And we really shouldn't need to replace UI text view with UILabel, the subclass, and UIButtons with other classes and whatnot to work around the issue. The system just cannot be that broken, or so I thought. I wasted a lot of time building a temporary solution while I worked on this problem. I dove down yet another rabbit hole and built a UI control subclass to fix the issue, quote unquote, while I just kept digging. It looked exactly like a UI button class, and all the preset styles were included in it, but it used a custom label instead of the system one. The first attempt was a UI button subclass, which laid out a custom label directly over the top of the default label with a whole bunch of KVO and everything else to make it look like it was the real thing. And TLDR, I just git stashed that branch. I was like, nope, and we're just going to do something else a bit easier. So where are we at now? This is what I forced myself to write down before. We grew tired of WackerLabel. I checked Figma and Sketch. I opened so many documents that my MacBook, still the Intel one, I just upgraded to an M1 Max for work and doesn't have the problem, but it was very hot and very angry with 50 documents in Figma and Sketch open. All the fonts were rendering fine, and the text rect, line height, et al. Was completely fine. None of the zibs and storyboards, and I checked every single one of them, had fixed sizes on the labels. And other companies were facing the same issue, and I was just, it was really getting to me. I was like, I'm going to find this, I'm determined. But I should add, we don't make size static in our zibs, because I put a dot point here, because we do somewhat support dynamic text sizes. So I could have, increased the rect in constraints to like 40, made that the minimum, told everyone you have to make that 40 so it would fit, but it really wouldn't have been great overall. At last, about 3 days in, I had my eureka moment. We all know that the default iOS and I think macOS font as well is SF Pro, or at least SF UI. However, in Japan and in Japanese, the default font appears to be Hiragino Sans. I zoomed everything in and I examined the characters, the pixel layout. It was the closest match. I may be wrong, but I fully doubt that. I'm pretty confident. I examined far too many screens in iOS and macOS, and no screen seemed to have any issue with text being clipped, like descending Y characters if the languages were mixed, for example, like system preferences with Japanese suffixes on the end or whatever. No characters were being clipped, so something wasn't right. I fired up a test project. You'd think I would have done that before now, but I wanted to really examine the app to see if it was actually our problem first. And, Japanese characters, they all sit within a square. And this is where it starts getting into the meat of the issue. The periods, they sit within the square on the left-hand side in the bottom left corner. Everything is monospaced in Japanese and Chinese as well. I noticed that Korean, and an interesting aside is Korean is also somewhat monospaced. They have a unique height and a unique width, but they are not square. So I was not confident in testing the Korean default font for this. And because Hiragino is built around this square and it's been around the block, it's pushing 30 or more years old, If there were large issues with it, I'm sure it would have been fixed before now. More people would have seen it. And I'm saying this to myself when I was building this fix because I wasn't sure whether I was on the right track or not. I think people would have reported, an interesting aside here, unless people really didn't care and left the issues unreported for 30 years or more and just worked around the issue in Excel spreadsheets and Word documents. The font also may be older than 30, I will disclaim there. Wikipedia Sensei says the font has been sold to professionals since 93, but it may have been made before that. In addition, talking about the font itself now, it does support English, in brackets, Roman characters. And what do these characters have that Japanese characters do not? And that is ascenders and descending values. The next rabbit hole. In my test project, I put a UILabel stock standard just on the screen and told it to display the text Konnichiwa. I printed the font and it told me it was SFUI regular, but upon examination, zooming real close in, the glyphs matched Hiragino Sans when they were Japanese, but the English matched SFUI. After much investigation, it seemed that the inferred font, in this case, in the zib, saying system font size and just leaving it, will fall back to Hiragino using the cascading font mechanism, as far as I'm able to tell, if its font glyph table cannot handle whatever character it's being told to display. So the font was SFUI, but it pulled those 5 kana out of Hiragino and put it straight in the label. For some reason, that's not broken when you just leave it. The text wasn't being clipped yet, so I added an English descending character into the same string, and there was still no clipping. But then I noticed that we were doing something in the PayPay app that I wasn't doing in my test project, and we were specifying the fonts explicitly. So I added an extra label to the test project and wrapped them in a UI stack view. The labels were identical, unmodified, UILabel objects. They had the same font set in the zib. They had both the same string preset, and in code I specified the font for only the left one, well, in the top one in the screenshot I'm about to show you. And the results surprised me. It seemed that the fonts were being returned incorrectly. I did a loud sigh and head desk at this point. My first message to the team was to subtract 1 from the font size specified in Figma to avoid this issue. But we decided that this would have a few nasty knock-on effects. 1, we could forget to do that, and clipping tickets would still be filed by QA and would address, because, human error is a thing. And 2, subtracting 1 would affect the English mode, because we use a different font for that. We don't rely on Hiragino Sans. But in that mode, because certain things are Japanese specific, we do display some basic things in Japanese. The text would be too small if I did that, ultimately, I decided, so not a great value. Not a great solution, rather. I then printed out the descender and ascender values, as well as the line heights from each font, and they were all inconsistent when I specified the font. I specified the same size as what I had set in the zib, and everything was just completely inconsistent. And I wonder whether SFUI, like its font metrics, were being used in that case or not. Like the ascending and descending values were adequate enough to display everything. But when I specified Hiragino Sans, it was not. So I decided to take that left tween at Albuquerque, as Bugs Bunny likes to say. I dove into the font properties, and I certainly noticed that the descending value was just too small, and the line height needed to change because of the 1.2x size issue. I think I've accidentally skipped a slide. Sorry about that. Yes. Sorry, I'll just go back to this one. My bad. if I set the initial advice aside, if I jacked the font size down a little bit anyway, it actually didn't restore the clipped descender or ascending characters. So I decided to investigate a little bit further. Now we're on to this one. Diving into the font itself, yes, the descending value was a bit too small and the line height needed to change. And I say because of the 1.2x size issue. When I examined it visually, the 20 points and 20 points that I supplied equally in zib and in code, the value that I received on the screen was roughly, and with careful calculation, 1.213 times bigger than what I actually wanted. And it's not perfect, but I took that left turn and decided to swizzle the font itself using an extension. So I ended up, multiplying the descender and ascending values by that value that I was able to determine with math. It's ugly, but it worked. And it's not perfect, as swizzling rarely is. The value I multiply with is literally just a careful guess. It's a magic number. It could be wrong. It could be slightly too much, could be slightly too little. Visually, it seemed to fix the issue. However, all of the recs now line up with Figma perfectly. When I take a screenshot of the device or I fire it up in Reveal and I have everything up on the screen, I'm like, every rect that I'm seeing matches exactly what has been specified on screen. So great. And there seem to be zero remaining font clipping issues in the app, because like most swizzling extensions, you call them in like app delegate or something, or scene delegate, wherever you wish to. It fixed the issue. And now I sit here and I wonder, where do I go now? Decided to keep calm and fail a radar once I figured out all of this out, and I pushed my PR up to introduce the swizzle, and everyone was bamboozled by the Objective-C associated object code, which they all termed dark magic. I don't know whether this issue is specific to iOS and macOS. I genuinely don't. I wasn't going to spend much more time on it. To be truthful, it was a week at that point. I built a little sample project and I sent it off to Apple, but I have radars up there as we do all. That's not the right phrasing, but you get what I mean. From 2008 that are actually still unresolved. So I'm not going to hold my breath because I will asphyxiate, no doubt. And I can't help but wonder if this issue has reared its head anywhere else that anyone has ever noticed, and whether, and if you can think of any, I'd love to hear from you. Alternatively, if you can think of any other solutions that I could have used instead of swizzling everything in the end when it came right down to it, I'd love to hear from you, and I'm happy to replace that at any point in the code base, because I really don't like doing it, but it was everything I needed. So that's everything. That's all from me tonight. Thank you for hearing me rant about the rabbit holes I was diving down over the past few weeks. I'll stop my screen share now and hand over back to Pete and Rob.
Did you have time for questions before you duck off, Ben? Does anybody have any questions? We have a question. Hang on a sec. You can hear us, right? I think. No,
No, sorry, I can't hear you.
How about now?
Yep, that's great.
Yep. Right, got a couple of questions. Hang on. Amy had her hand up first.
Hey Ben, love the talk and the in-depth into fonts and glyphs and everything. My suggestion is, if you just went for the system font everywhere instead of specifying something explicitly, would it solve the issue?
I did think about that actually when I was doing this, but our use case doesn't really allow that actually, because we use a different font entirely for English mode versus Japanese mode. We actually do specify that this is the font we need to use right now, and falling back to system would work for Japanese, but English would actually still be broken in that case because we do mix glyphs. So we'll have 3,000 yen written on the screen, and there's digits 3,000, and then the little yen symbol, which came from Hiragino by default, no other option, and it was also being clipped and removed. And it seemed to be, no matter what I did, if I left it automatically select, it would clip one or the other. And ultimately it was, well, can we accept monetary amounts being clipped off from the screen? And we thought, well, no, it is a financial app and the user does need to know how much is being displayed, the currency symbol, even though it's relatively obvious here. We can't let those sort of things fly. So I'm fairly confident in my ability in the swizzling decision. But obviously, I think if we didn't support English and we did just support Japanese text, it wouldn't be a problem. We'd be able to rely on the system font and having it cascade down to whichever font table it needed. So it was a catch-22.
So if I follow correctly, the issue still occurs if it's like just no explicit definition of a font. Yep.
Yeah, it was occurring in all use cases for us, so it was vexing, to say the least.
Hi, thank you for the speech. Was good. Just curious, did you had to roll back all the subclasses, the UI button and UI labels, after your change, or that just went quite along with it?
Sorry, I couldn't really hear Hugh's question all that well. Was that about the subclasses, whether they're still around?
Yeah, have you rolled all that back now?
Sorry, Hugh, do you mind repeating your question? Sorry.
Question was, have you rolled back all of the subclasses now?
Yes, actually, like the subclasses were able to just go, and I talked with my team and we decided on what I termed a soft deprecation. So don't delete the file and just remove it all completely. Just stop using it and still leave it there in case we need to fall back on it. But so far so good. We have 0 usages of the subclass left. It was a mammoth task to try to replace them all in the zibs, but we did, and it still allowed the project to compile, obviously, because the class could still be found if we missed one. I think thankfully we've passed that period, but yeah, it was cathartic to clear out 800 plus lines of crazy subclasses and replace it with a short swizzle.
I bet it was. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thank you.